I'm Eli David. I'm the CEO of StartupBlink. Really nice to connect with all of you. And today we're talking about the main challenges of startup ecosystem growth. One of the most interesting topic for us when we're building ecosystems is to try to understand what makes ecosystems good, and what are the things that are stopping us from being successful while developing our startup ecosystem. So that's something that we're always interested to dive into this topic, to try to understand it. As you know, startup ecosystems today are at full rage, and for a good reason. Governments and countries have understood that a good startup ecosystem is a massive engine of growth for their ecosystem. So we're very much, everyone is interested in the secret sauce of how to build an ecosystem. I think that this talk will actually show us that it's complicated, more complicated than what we think, and there are no fast solutions. And I'm going to explain why, but I'm also going to explain a few things that, if dealt with, are relatively quick wins, low-hanging fruits that can really help us develop our startup ecosystem regardless. I will say that development of startup ecosystem does require a lot of patience as well. And that's something that, unfortunately, not a lot of people have, and we should have as we're building our ecosystems. Now, by the way, during this conversation, I see that we have people from Belgium and from Israel and from Berlin and so on, mostly European. During this session, feel free to post questions in the chat. If you have any questions or any topic you want me to expand on, really feel free to do that. The agenda for the talk today, as Catherine mentioned, we're going to do this, then we're going to jump to ecosystem pitches, then we're going to move on to a panel about data and startup ecosystem research, and then 2 more hours of pitches, so that's going to be exciting. The agenda for this specific talk about the challenges is going to be, before we're going to start talking about the challenges, I'm quickly going to do a quick intro about StartupBlink for those of you that might not know us, and also going to speak about recent updates as for what we're working on and so on. So that's going to take 5 minutes, and then we're going to move to the other items. So first of all, a quick introduction. StartupBlink is a global startup ecosystem map. It's free for everyone to use. So for those of you that are not using it, feel free. It's there. It's at startupblink.com/startups. You just click on the map on the homepage, and that's allowing you a visualization of ecosystems, browsing through industries and type of entities or whatever else you want to do. So that's how people use the map generally. I will tell you that one of the most interesting things that we do is an algorithm, an index that ranks the startup ecosystems of 1,000 cities and 100 countries. We are great believers in the concept of, let's say, positioning yourself or being in a good ecosystem will greatly contribute to your chances of success of your startup. A lot of founders are not thinking enough about this topic, and we're trying to convince everyone to make sure that they are aware that the place where you are can be the reason for your success. The reason is that a lot of us are stuck in places that are generally not that good, and that creates a situation that it doesn't seem painful. We might even be saving money, living in our family home, and so on and so on. But the real cost is the opportunity cost. This is something that people are ignoring. What are we missing out because we're not in the right place? All those moments, if you ask, by the way, it's really interesting. If you ask entrepreneurs, what happened that got your startup to the next level, in many, many cases, it would be a random encounter with someone. You go to a meetup, you speak with an investor, someone gives you an idea to totally change your business, someone makes a valuable connection that happened relatively randomly. And those are things that are happening in high quality startup ecosystems. and they're generally not happening in low quality ecosystems. So once again, where we are is critical. The thing is that being in the wrong place doesn't feel so bad. You just don't know of everything else that you've been missing out on. So it's kind of like the idea. Going back to that, we built an algorithm that has about 40 different parameters that ranks the ecosystems of those 1,000 cities and of those 100 cities. All of it is open for you to view and to use as you're making decisions on those things. I will also tell you that there is also, together with that, a report. There is also free. Everything is free in StartupBlink. So the report basically goes over those conclusions. So if you want to dive deeper, understand the methodology and so on, and go over each one of those 100 countries, feel free. So that's kind of like the idea. I will say that we're very happy to have with us more than 80 partners from governments that are mapping their ecosystem via StartupBlink, which is absolutely great. Something that we just initiated recently, and I would like to share with you, is also ecosystem dashboards. So the idea over here is that every city has its own dashboard. So you can click on the city name and basically see what are the main strengths of this ecosystem, a little bit of a dive into. For example, I clicked on London. Over here, you can do any search that you want when you click on the dashboard and see what are the top industries in each city and so on. So very high quality resolution of what's happening in each one of the cities of the planet, which is absolutely great. And that's something that we added recently. I will say that some other news from our side is that we're also deploying, so when we get back to the presentation, we're also deploying portals for our clients, a new addition of portals that would allow each one of our partners to basically have a startup ecosystem portal of their city branded on them. And that's something that we're going to be launching in December and January, mostly in January. So fun things are happening. I will just share one last piece of news before we move on to the challenges. Today, we're launching the Coronavirus Resilience Innovation Map. This is a map featuring more than 2,500 innovations. If you're on our newsletter, we're going to also send you the link to it. 2,500 innovation in the field of coronavirus, and also rankings of all the cities and countries in this specific vertical. This will be launched together with the UNAIDS and the Health Innovation Exchange. We have an event at 5 o'clock in Geneva, and we'll be launching it there. So really excited for that, and we'll share the news with you on the newsletter. So that's basically a little bit about that. I also want to congratulate our new partners. We have the Seoul Business Angels joining us from Seoul, working with us together on the ecosystem development of Seoul. We have the Cámara de Comercio de Cali, the Chambers of Commerce of Bogota as well, has joined us recently as a new partner. By the way, really great things are happening recently in Colombia in terms of innovation, which is absolutely great to see how Colombia is becoming a hub of innovation in South America. This is a country that nobody thought about as an innovation up to 5 years ago, and now it's really becoming a substantial and powerful startup ecosystem. And of course, open Yokohama. Yokohama is a city close to Tokyo. One of the reasons why the Tokyo area is so successful is Yokohama, and a lot of great things are happening in this ecosystem as well. So yeah, altogether really happy with all those new partners joining our network. If you're from the public sector and want to join us, feel free. This is the email, feedback@startupblink.com. Love to onboard you as well to join this network of more than 80 governments already working with us. And yeah, I guess we can start with the presentations. Once again, if you have any questions, feel free to use the QA, and we'll just let you I'll try to catch questions. So I see that we have already. I'm going to go back to them as we go through the slides. I want to go first of all on the first slides that have to do with the cultural challenges and the entrepreneurial mindset. So the idea over here, and this is one of our major understandings, is that the elements that have to do with mindset and psychology are the most influential elements to define if your ecosystem is good or is struggling, and so on. And there is an experiment that we call it the why experiment. The why experiment is asking people why, for example, a question with why. For example, why is your startup ecosystem underperforming? And the answer would be generally something like, we don't have enough investors. So you would put the blame on investors. But then this experiment is actually, or exercise is actually drilling down and asking, but why? And why? And why? So in this case, you don't have enough investors, and you ask why. And you would say, oh, that's an interesting question. Probably because we don't have enough startups of high quality. And then you would ask again, okay, but why? And then as you go down to layers of why, you would discover that one of the main reasons is that the mindset is not necessarily there. So that's kind of like a fun exercise to do. And I see that we have a question from Evelyn. So let me quickly answer that and we'll continue. So just a second, I'm going to read it. Evelyn is asking, what is your experience? Is it better to be in an ecosystem of the same sector or industry like finance or edtech or health tech? Or is it better to be in a general ecosystem? So yeah, that's a good one. I'll deal with this before we go to back to the psychologies. Generally, there are a few types of ecosystems in the world. Some of them are general, and there are very, very few of them. I can mention a few: San Francisco, London, maybe New York, although London and New York are both leaning towards fintech. Tel Aviv is another one. So the idea is that the answer to the question is that the bigger the hub is, for example, if you're San Francisco, you can attack all the sectors out there and become a general ecosystem that is basically a mecca of ecosystems in all industries. If you're starting out and you're not basically in the top 50, let's say in rankings, let's say you can go to StartupBlink and see where you rank, then actually going and focusing on one sector would make a lot of sense. I know a lot of cities, smaller cities, that are doing extremely well on specific sectors. For example, you have Odense in Denmark that is doing extremely well on robotics. So basically, the only really type of startups they have is robotics. They've made a conscious decision to focus on robotics because they know that they're a small, relatively small city, and they want to be known for one specific industry. So my advice would be to start with a specific sector if your ecosystem is in a relatively lower stage, and then advance and add more industries as this thing is happening. Of course, the industry, you have to choose it by the history and your unfair advantages in what sectors is your city excelling in. Odense, for example, had an interesting case that they have a very big company back then in the days that was closing down. So all the equipment was used in order to build robots in a way. So you can use some kind of a key, let's say, event that happens in your city or your ecosystem, and then leverage it to build a very, very strong sector. But I do think that in many cases, it makes sense for the public sector and the ecosystem developers to pick one sector to push this forward, thinking about your unfair advantages. And if you're lucky enough and you're in a big city and a big hub, then try to push all the sectors all together. So yeah, hope that was helpful. So feel free to ask more questions in the QA. So yeah, going back to the why experiment, basically the why experiment shows us that it doesn't matter why you think your ecosystem is not good enough. The reason would be something psychological, because why you don't have enough investors? Because there are not enough good startups. Why don't you have enough startups? Oh, that's interesting. Here we're starting to deal with psychology. And over here it would be not enough people want to become startup founders. And then you would ask again, why? And you would have and it would go back, just like in any psychological experiment, to your parents, because your parents prefer you would have a stable 9-to-5 job instead of trying something experimental and failing. So, so this is the nice thing, and I think that for us to understand this is very important, because first of all, this would allow us to build strategies, knowing that there are not really quick solutions. Because if you really are honest with yourself about why your startup ecosystem is underperforming, you would see that those reasons are very deep. A lot of them have to do with the psychology and the mindset of our people, in a way. And that's exactly why startup ecosystem development is hard and slow. You can't really achieve success very fast. However, as I mentioned before, there are a few low-hanging fruits out there, which we should definitely utilize if we can. So that's for that. Great. So let's move on to the next slide. If you have questions, feel free. So let's talk a little bit about those elements of culture, mindset, psychology that are related to entrepreneurship. The first one would be individualism compared to collectivism, in the ability to disconnect and create something new. So the idea over here is that in some countries, the ability for a person to start something new instead of doing what everyone else is doing is limited. You can see this, for example, in ecosystems in Asia and so on, where the social structures are strong, and the drifting away from a social structure can be very, very problematic. This is a psychological element that creates a lot of problems for startup ecosystem building, because we don't have enough entrepreneurs. That's basically the result. The second one is the social pressure to either get a stable job or either become an entrepreneur. For example, in countries in South Europe, Greece, Portugal, and so on, and this is thankfully now changing finally, there is a lot of social pressure to maintain a 9-to-5 job. In this basically context of don't give up. If you have already a job, stay there. In Spain, there is something very interesting. I'm there now in Spain, currently in Cadiz, in the south of Spain, trying to get a job for the public sector and so on. So this is the what society is pushing you towards. However, in other countries, for example, I'm originally from Israel. Over there, working for a boss or for a company is actually looked down upon. In a way, if you do that, or you work for the public sector and so on, people will not tell you how lucky you are. They will tell you, well, didn't you even think about opening your own company and so on. So in Israel, the pressure is more on the other side of open your own company. Why are you working for a boss? So those cultural elements are critical for the success of the ecosystem, what the population is basically thinking. Other than that, we have the problem of both extremes, of either lowering expectations, being very modest. For example, we have in some countries in Scandinavia, being modest and not bragging too much about your achievements is considered a very good trait. By the way, we also teach children to not brag, right? To always say the truth and not brag, which is important, I have to say, and it's a very good trait. We don't like to, everyone is bragging, getting on everyone's nerves in a way. However, I have to tell you that this mentality, when you build a startup, might not be the best mentality. In Israel and the USA, for example, you have more the mentality of fake it until you make it. Have a giant dream without much connection to reality. Be some kind of a delirious person that has amazing aspiration. Talk about this to everyone, although you don't really have a lot, and then it builds itself. And in startups, it's incredibly important because you're doing something new that nobody else does. So if you're not a little bit delirious and kind of lying to yourself a little bit, in a way, you would find it very hard to succeed. if you would come as a modest person and say, currently I have nothing and I'm really hoping to achieve this mild growth and so on. No, not really, right? You want someone that arrives and say, I'm going to build the best product in the world in X, Y, Z, and so on. And this mentality is very difficult for some cultures and countries. And we have to work on this. This is something that we have to work on as well. Other type of a psychological element would be attitudes towards uncertainty and failure or general optimism. So you have a few countries where you have really a lot of optimism as to you can get it done and let's try something new and so on. You would have other cultures that would be avoiding uncertainty, always playing it safe and so on. Again, it has to do with education and the mindset. And it's very interesting to see how psychology is so influential in this element. Other than that, we have the perception of successful people. This is actually very interesting, and I find this extremely important. We call it the heroes versus the manipulators. So in one country, someone that has made it big and made an exit and so on is a hero. Basically, someone that helped the economy and did something bad, and they would did something great, and they would be on the covers of magazines, and everyone would speak about them, and so on and so on. In other countries, the same person would be considered by society as a manipulator. Oh yeah, they always only succeeded because their parents helped them. There was a corruption involved over there, and so on and so on. So the idea is that when societies are viewing people that are successful with their startup, let's say, as manipulators with an unfair advantage, it creates a problem. Why does it create a problem? One, nobody wants to imitate them because nobody wants to be a manipulator like those bad guys and girls that became rich. The second reason is that the so-called manipulators themselves, once they make it big, they would not stay in a place that doesn't celebrate their success as heroes. So in places that usually, we saw this in previous communist countries, where capitalism was very frowned upon and so on, we saw that if someone is relatively successful, everyone is saying, no, they did something bad. What it creates is that basically this entrepreneur, once they made it big, you would see them 1 year after in the United States. They would just go to the US. However, in societies that celebrate those success stories, those entrepreneurs, and this is critical, are going to stay in the ecosystem and become investors, mentors, and so on and so on. No, everyone wants to be a hero. It's an ego trip. Nobody wants to be a bad manipulator. And your attitude towards the success stories of your country are really going to influence if those people are going to stay, or are they going to go to places where they're going to be considered as heroes. And that's something that a lot of people are ignoring. It's important. One more thing that we have as a psychological element would be the victimized mindset. The game is rigged, the government doesn't help me enough, and so on and so on. And that's something that we see a lot in Europe, for example. The expectation that the government is there to help you to start, to grow, to scale, and so on and so on. That mindset does not work. In places like Israel and the USA and the other London and so on, you know by definition that you're depending on yourself, that nobody's going to help you in a way. In other places, people are expecting too many things, and it's really not helpful. Of course, getting help is always nice, and we always like to get help, but there are some societies that are expecting this help by default. I've been in a few ecosystems that most of the time of the entrepreneurs is on bureaucracy, filling in forms or grants. And I have to tell you, very sad. This is a sad thing. It's how people pushing their product, trying to tap into the market, trying to tap into investors. They're basically pitching governments, not fun at all. The other psychological element would be cash flow and quick wins versus skin in the game and perseverance. We're talking about people that are jumping into the unknown, being able to take massive amount of risks, being able to also put some of their savings inside their companies as well. and compared to people that they don't want to do that in a way. And by the way, we're always saying, if you don't put a little bit of your own money in your business and expect people to do it from day one, you're also going to leave your company the minute you hit the first low point, and there's going to be so many low points. So kind of like, again, a psychological element. Every one of us can be successful. The question is, what kind of a mindset do we adopt? And the last one that we can mention, although there are many, many psychological elements of startup ecosystems, is trust and give first. The Silicon Valley, I have not spent a lot of time there. I have to say that I really want to. When you ask people about what makes Silicon Valley so interesting, is apparently this atmosphere of give first. People are very interested to help each other. It's not clear how it happened, but imagine a situation where everyone around you is so careful, suspicious of each other, you will also become suspicious. The great ecosystems actually have some kind of a general, very positive vibe of, oh, yeah, you're doing this, let me help you, let me connect you with this person and with this person and so on. And you would have other ecosystems where everything that you would do, you would ask for an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, thinking that someone is just about the corner to steal your idea and so on. So this thing about trust is critical, because when you don't have trust, you can't pitch your startup. You can't recruit more people and get them on board with your vision. You can't get investors, because what investor would trust you with their money, and so on. And you can't have co-founders, because those agreements are not really enforceable. So giving percentage to someone and so on and so on, it can be very scary in those locations where you don't have trust. So again, psychology is massively important over here, and influences our startup ecosystem. And that's why a big chunk of startup ecosystem development is actually very slow. And we need a lot of patience to change mindsets, and we have to work on changing those mindsets. I'll see if I have any questions, and then we'll move on to the other challenges, because they're not only psychological. I'm sorry about the chat being disabled. We can, but we do it for a reason, because it's going to be very hard for me to track the chat. So please use the Q&A button if you have questions, and I will ask them. Yeah, thanks Evelyn for the take on this. This is interesting. Yeah, psychology, we can dive much deeper into the psychological elements, but definitely this is probably the deepest layer for startup ecosystem success that exists. So that's kind of like the idea. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free. Moving on a little bit to another topic, which is the connected to the psychological things that we talked about, the impact of success stories on entrepreneurial mindset. So the question is, how does one leverage a startup story or success stories? We talked about how important it is to celebrate our ecosystem success. And the idea is that if you celebrate the ecosystem success, then you create some kind of a great result, which is the narrative of the hero that we talked about, no longer a manipulator. Someone made it big. Instead of saying, oh, they did something wrong, they actually become cultural heroes of our economy, of our societies, which is important. And then, of course, those entrepreneurs are going to be staying in the ecosystem and becoming local investors, becoming mentors, and so on. If you research the success stories of the Israeli and Estonian startup ecosystem, let's talk for a second about Estonia. The same happened in Israel. Estonia had one startup called Skype, which was also a Swedish startup, by the way, but Estonia took full ownership of it for a good reason. And the idea is that what they have is called the Skype mafia. So when they sold Skype, Estonian founders had a lot of money. And those founders are actually building the next generation of the Estonian companies that you know now. If I'm not mistaken, Pipedrive and Wise, TransferWise, and Bolt, and many other companies are originated from this Skype mafia. So an exit of only one company and a feeling by the founders that they want to support and invest in their local startup ecosystem has created an entire generation of high quality new companies, and just shows you this amazing domino effect of what happens if someone is succeeding in your ecosystem and then distributing it, compared to success stories where people ran away to other countries. And everyone was in our countries have to decide which model do we want. A model where the success stories feel like they're superheroes and keep on investing to create other superheroes, or a model where those people are running away. And that's a decision. So they run away so everyone feel like there is more equality. That's a decision each one of us has to make. It has pros and cons to both of them. So we know our opinion, but everyone has their opinion and they're entitled to it. Let's talk about what happens when we have a successful story to our ecosystem. What is basically happening? What is the psychology? I want to tell you a personal experience of what happened to me. I remember in 2000, I was I was doing my military service in Israel, and I didn't know anything about startups. And then there was a news in the magazine, ICQ, which was an Israeli startup back in the days, just sold to AOL, American Online, used to be a massive corporate back in the days, for, I don't remember how much, $200 million. Back then, it was crazy amount of money. Today, almost on a daily basis, there is a new Israeli unicorn being formed. But over there, it was like a massive amount of money. And you would read the magazine and you would say, what? Like, how did this happen? And then I remember all my friends reading the same and saying, wait, what are those startups? Can I actually do this myself? And so on. So the idea is that when you see those success stories and they flood between people, basically people are kind of like saying, wait. This seems interesting. So I don't have to do a 9-to-5. There is other option to become super rich, even if my parents are not rich and so on. So that's kind of, it gives you a lot of inspiration. It can be done. A little bit of envy. I have to tell you, in Israel, exits are so common, unicorns are so common, that every one of us know of someone that raised $20 million, that made an exit and so on. So the idea is that those are people that sometimes you say to yourself, I'm smarter than them. I know them, right? I've been in school with them. They're not superhumans at all. So the idea is that when you see someone that made it big and you know this person, it gives you a lot of motivation to do it yourself instead of dragging your feet to the office to a 9-to-5. For example, if she or he can do it, why can't I? And you see the examples. It's not like mythological stories in magazines. It's even more. You see it in your neighborhood, your next door neighbor, and so on. So that's always good. Envy, sometimes being jealous, is always good. Not always good, but sometimes it is good. Looking at someone and saying, I want the same outcome. And that's happening in Israel in a crazy rate. When this is the beauty of achieving a critical mass of an ecosystem that you see, and then you do it yourself, and then everyone is doing it in a way. We talked about someone you know, we talked about the element of serial entrepreneurs. There are people that simply keep on doing it time after time. They make an exit, they make another exit, they make another exit, and they become an investor. That's basically the road of what's happening, and that's what's building an ecosystem. The key is to make people stay. That's the most critical thing. Investors. Let's talk a little bit about investors. Remember, we talked about maybe one of the main reasons when you ask people, why isn't your ecosystem successful? Many of them will tell you, we don't have enough investors. And then we do the why exercise. You would see that you don't need almost no policy of investors. The only thing you need in order to get investors is success stories. So it's a little bit like the egg and the chicken. But the idea is that investors notice success. For example, in the case of Israel, or in the case of London, or even in the case of San Francisco and so on, investors just notice there is exit after exit after exit, a unicorn after unicorn after unicorn. They're not there. They have this FOMO, fear of missing out, and they would arrive. Try to stop them. You will not be able to stop them. So the idea is that those success stories are building an investment ecosystem as well. Because at the end of the day, you can convince investors as much as you like, they would arrive if they see success. So show to them that your ecosystem has potential of being successful, and then good things are happening, you would have an investor ecosystem. But show that there is milestone traction, track records, and so on. And of course, later on, tax revenues and jobs. Success of startups implies massive economic benefits for the country. In this case, massive tax revenue, massive jobs. I can tell you that there are a few countries, namely Israel, that the economy has massively changed because of the success of the startups. There are some bad elements, by the way, to that. Israel, for example, has two economies. One, a global economy, cutting edge of the startup ecosystem. A second economy, 80% of the economy is a slow, low efficient economy that tries to catch up to the startup economy and can't. So it creates a little bit of imbalance as well. But the 20% of the high tech is pushing the entire economy forward, creating a lot of revenue for the country. And I have to tell you, startups involve a lot of money for countries. Countries that do not invest in startups are giving up on massive amount of future revenues in the future. Startups, you can say, and some people don't agree, are the new oil. If you basically create a startup ecosystem that works well, you keep on generating money for your economy and strengthening the geopolitical situation of your country. Many countries are doing that, and countries that are not doing that, I think, are missing out. So probably something to think about. I will allow, if anyone has any questions, you have the Q&A, so feel free. I'll just wait 20 seconds, 10 seconds to see if you have any questions. And then great. You can ask questions also during the other slides. So we're moving now a little bit to easier things to deal with, which are the legislation challenges. Those are things that we can change, that can actually be changed by our governments. Some of them are relatively low-hanging fruits. So let's talk a little bit about those legislation challenges. The first one is going to be complex and high taxes and social security for startups and individuals. I've seen a lot of countries that make it extremely difficult for people to even register as an individual providing services. Many countries in Europe, by the way, that make it extremely, because in the beginning, you're not going to open a company. You're not going to start a company. You're going to become an individual trying to do a few experiments and so on. If you make it so painful for people to register, to pay their social security as a freelance, you start them with on higher brackets of social security and taxes, you're killing your startup ecosystem. Once again, this is happening in places like Spain, Portugal, Greece, and many other countries. Just self-suicide of an ecosystem. It's so sad to see it, and I keep on seeing it. I think that a lot of countries are now addressing this much more than before, and we see a lot of cities that are pushing towards help on this. But really, like, such a low-hanging fruit and such a pity. It's kind of like an old economy reminder in a way. Do that, you lose your entrepreneurs. Because I have to tell you, the most ambitious and the high quality entrepreneurs, they can't deal with bureaucracy. Make their life difficult on bureaucracy, they would leave. They would just go to somewhere better. So something to think about. Difficulties in opening a company or closing a company. You have a few places where opening a company takes so long that you just go somewhere else. The same for closing a company. It's very important to know that if your company does not work and you want to close it, the closure is relatively fast. Not happening in many locations. Just a low-hanging fruit that makes so much sense, and still inability to form investment funds legally. You have a few countries where it's very difficult to build an investor fund or some kind of investor syndicate. Countries so-called are protecting their their society from becoming investors because everyone is stupid. They don't know what they do, right? And that creates a situation that basically you don't have investors because the country is acting like a nanny, basically not trusting you to become an investor and so on. It is justified in some cases. In other cases, makes everyone's life so much difficult. Like if there is no clear structure of becoming an investor, if you don't get incentives, tax deductions, and so on, there's nothing. The UK is actually great on this. I've recently been in the UK, and they are putting a lot of effort on making life very, very easy for investors, and with a lot of incentives to invest. And that's the beauty in countries that get it. And it's just simple. There is no reason other than laziness not to work on those avenues. The other would be the flexible employment laws. So let's say I'm I don't know, entrepreneur in Denmark. So over there, the employees are so well defended, that it's great, right? Why not defend employees? But then again, imagining you starting a startup, employing the first two people on a model that you don't even know if it's going to exist or not, and so on and so on, and then if things are not working, having such difficulty to fire those two people that you can do it. And that's extremely scary for an entrepreneur, knowing that they can be flexible and move fast. And that's a little bit sad to see as well. So once again, a lot of the reasons why ecosystems are not succeeding is because governments actually have great intentions. They want to defend its population. They want to defend our rights as employees and so on. But the misunderstanding is that startups are so volatile and uncertain that when you do that, you would just go somewhere else where you can actually hire and fire much faster. You're doing something that is incredibly experimental. Again, a tragedy that you see a lot in some European countries and sometimes in Asian countries and so on. So a problem. And each country has to kind of make decisions about the right balance. And it's never easy. But yeah, that's an interesting topic. The other one would be visas for foreign entrepreneurs. Over here, of course, you want foreign talent to arrive. And in this case, of course, make it harder for people to arrive to your country. The more you miss out on high quality entrepreneurs that are trying to move from an ecosystem that they don't like. So open your doors, for example. The USA until recently and also recently is very opening its door for entrepreneurs. They know that they want the talent from the outside. This is critical for them. A lot of their, just see who are the CEOs of their countries, of their companies. Google, Twitter, Microsoft, a lot of them are Indian entrepreneurs that were born in India, felt like the opportunities in India were not good enough. Once again, this is an example how India lost such amazing people that are now running the world's biggest companies in the USA. So it shows you a country that has such amazing talent and doesn't leverage it, loses it, to countries that are opening their doors. The USA, for example, is really benefiting from opening those doors, which made it very weird, by the way, that 2 or 3 years ago, they started to close the doors. And I think that they're reversing this now because they understand that they need the talent. The talent is building them. I will say, just as for legislation and so on, if an ecosystem developer from a government should only choose one policy, because there are many, many policies, some of them are very helpful. But let's say if you want to choose only one, we still recommend for this policy is to avoid doing damage to your own ecosystem. Just make sure where are you exactly causing damage with social security, with high taxes and so on, and just make sure that you stop doing this damage even before you try giving incentives and so on. Because there are so many low-hanging fruits and barriers and damage that we create ourselves to our own economies and startup ecosystems. So that would be probably the biggest thing. The most important advice, if we would have to give only one advice for legislation and for ecosystem developments by the governments. This slide is very self-explanatory. Needless to say, infrastructure is critical for startup ecosystem development. The better your infrastructure is, the better your startup ecosystem can become. We're talking about the basic things like high quality internet, electricity, roads, mainly for secondary ecosystems that you're not isolated and can move between those ecosystems, airport connections that you can quickly bounce between places. Although in COVID time, it's a lot more difficult. By the way, COVID time allows us, because of this remote revolution, to be able for the first time to do great things if you're not in the center. For example, I'm now in Cadiz in Spain, not generally one of the biggest startup ecosystems in Spain, but still be able to do a lot of things because now it's very, let's say, okay in a way to build things when you're working remotely outside of your office. Other infrastructure that we always like to see is places where you can take a conference room or event places and so on to put on events. And of course, co-working spaces, which we actually very much like. And co-working spaces are a great asset of each ecosystem. In some places, you don't have them, or you have ones that are in such low quality that they don't allow the ecosystem to grow. Let's see if we have any questions. Yeah, so Jose is asking about US investors have strong links with the UK and Israel. Many US VCs invest there, but not so much in other European countries. Would you recommend for an ecosystem based in the EU country to set up a UK or an Israel office to capture more investments and startups? Yes. Specifically I think that the UK is a great place to build a startup. Israel is a little bit of an interesting case study because it's a little bit uncommon for foreign entrepreneurs to open a startup in Israel. Israel has this aura of the Israeli founders, let's say, but I think that an ecosystem that is much more open for foreign relocation would be London. Kind of like if you look at the best startups now in London, you would see that startups like Wise and Revolut and so on are all done by Russian founders, Estonian founders, and so on. So yeah, I would say that if you're looking for US money and you can go to the US, which is the best thing, London would be a very good alternative. The US investors are worried about European startups for the reasons that we mentioned. Tell a US investor that you as a founder cannot easily fire people. They would tell you, thank you very much. I take my money somewhere else. So it's all a trade-off, basically. If you're after US money, those are the ecosystems that you probably want to target more. There are great investors now in the EU as well. And I think a lot of EU countries are understanding that they have to keep on pushing forward. And yeah, so that all depends on where do you want to go. I will say also, in StartupBlink, we have rankings of 1,000 cities. San Francisco is still first. By the way, San Francisco is suffering from major value dilution. They used to be 5 times more than any other ecosystem in the world in 2019, then 4 times more in 2020, and now they're 3 times more. The point is that San Francisco is actually committing value destructions like we've never seen before. It's still massively the mecca of the global startup ecosystem. But I want to tell you that not all of us have to choose the top locations. It really depends on where do we want to go with our startup. For example, StartupBlink is a startup. We develop mapping technologies for governments and so on. We do not feel like we need to be in the mecca of the global startup ecosystem, which is San Francisco. We also don't feel like we need to be in the top 20 because it's a relatively self-sustained operation and so on. However, if you want to build a startup that is going to be the next Google or Facebook and so on, you definitely need to be in one of the top hubs in the world. There is no way around it. And as you choose the ecosystem that you choose, also think about the vertical. For example, if you have a fintech company, probably New York and London or even Dubai are great. If you have another type of hardware and IoT and so on, maybe you should go to Shenzhen or Taipei as great locations for hardware and IoT, robotics, Odense, for example. So the idea is that you have to very much customize. It's not like there is one best ecosystem and everyone should be there. You have to customize your own conditions, your own preferences, your budget, your ambitions, and your vertical as well, and then pick the correct ecosystem as well. So that's kind of the idea. Other questions are welcome. Great. So we talked a little bit about the infrastructure. We can move on a little bit to the talent and capacity building challenges. So those are interesting things. This is basically building the knowledge base on our ability to innovate as entrepreneurs, giving us the skills and the cutting edge knowledge to innovate. So over here, we're talking about accelerators. Some ecosystems do not have enough accelerators, especially in COVID time. It's becoming very, very difficult, but accelerators are relatively important. I wouldn't say critical, but I would say good accelerator can have a massive impact. For example, Y Combinator and so on. Those are things that make a real impact. The big impact, I think, that if you want to invest on something in the terms of startup ecosystem success would be knowledge of English. The more you have better proficiency in English, for example, in Israel, I'm struggling with English myself, but what can you do? Everyone speaks English and you need to do your best to become proficient in English. The more you know English, the more the local entrepreneurs are geared towards global expansion. If you don't know English that well, you would always stay in your own, small swamp in a way. So that's something that I always tell people. If you want to do one thing that has to do with startup development, just teach your children better English. That would be the best thing you can do. Modern curriculum in universities. Some universities are not even aware of the topic of startups. They will teach you an entire MBA without focusing on startups. Why are we funding you? Basically, if you don't do that. So mentors are always good. Mentors have to do with the give first mentality. Not people that are trying to sell you stuff, but people that are genuinely interested to help, knowing that if they help you, they help themselves, they help the ecosystem, the pie is getting bigger, and so on. Events, absolutely important. Let's say a personal experience. I used to be in Barcelona and Madrid up until a week ago. And there were many events for startups. Many things were happening. Now I'm in Cadiz, in the south of Spain. No events for startups, crickets. Like I can't even find people that are interested in startups. I have to dig deeper to find them. So the idea is that when you have this vibrant ecosystem with a lot of events, with a lot of things are happening, there are connections, there is emotional support, great things are happening. And the last thing would be communities as well. There are places, for example, one of the things I like about the Las Palmas ecosystem in Tenerife, they have WhatsApp groups. So they send each other messages of, hey, this person has been succeeding recently, and here is a great success story, and we're going to meet for coffee and so on. This is also happening, by the way, in Cape Verde. I'm on the WhatsApp group of the Cape Verde startup ecosystem. Absolutely great. Everyone is sharing success, helping each other, connecting each other. And this is great. In some places, you feel totally isolated, like you're the only one working on a startup. And this is happening, it's dragging you down. So you don't want to be there. The capacity building and the communities is very important. A little bit about narratives and promotion challenges. The most ambitious, let me actually go to the QA and see if we have any questions. Andre is asking about the slides. We will send a recording of this and let us know if you need anything else. So we'll send. You will have the recording for sure. Let me see what Srindhar is asking. Foreign startups are really hard and more bureaucratic, and I really got a lot of challenges. In Ireland, where I currently work, I have so many restrictions. Any suggestion where I can make use until the restrictions are lifted? First of all, we try to go really hard to a place that wants you, that actually would like to have foreign talent from the outside. I would recommend two places. The first one is Estonia with the e-residency, and the second one would be the UK. The UK now has a startup visa that is very interesting, and I think both of those options are good. I also tell you that Taiwan has a gold card for inviting entrepreneurs to arrive to Taiwan. So I would say those are three of the ecosystems that I think have some very interesting program: Estonia, Taiwan, the UK, but there are more. So yeah, you just have to keep your eyes open, and again, go to places where you're welcome, where people are interested in your talent, and just avoid the ones that are not. Narrative and promotion challenges. Let's talk a little bit about this. We'll have our panel, by the way, starting a little bit later, around in about 8 to 9 minutes, to allow anyone the opportunity to arrive to it. Some narrative and promotional challenges. Your most ambitious entrepreneurs will leave an underperforming ecosystem. I have to tell you, this is one of the biggest tragedies of startup ecosystems. You have amazing people, and they leave, they build their startup somewhere else. You would never even know. Someone would say, hey, you know that the guy that built XYZ is actually from, so I'll give you an example. A small ecosystem in Canada, Ottawa. So they were lucky enough to receive a German immigrant that opened a startup there. This startup is now called Shopify. Shopify is now valued at $200 billion. Basically changed an entire economy, and this is only with one founder that used to be based in Germany, decided to relocate to Canada, and now built in Canada a company of $200 billion. This shows you how one person having a good trajectory can impact massively the local economy, and it shows you the tragedy of cities that are losing their best entrepreneurs. Imagine the impact of a 200 billion company on your economy. It's mind-boggling. A lot of us have smaller towns and so on that do not even know the people that they missed out on. And why? Why is that? Because the narrative of the ecosystem, those entrepreneurs felt like that if they stay in this ecosystem, they would not be successful. They have to move somewhere where there is more ambition and so on. The narrative and the promotional aspects of an ecosystem will also determine how many foreign entrepreneurs would arrive to the ecosystem. For example, San Francisco, London have amazing ecosystems because foreigners are arriving and building their startups there. Just look at how many foreign entrepreneurs are there in San Francisco. The same for London. It's incredible. Like, most of the founders are foreign. So the ability of your ecosystem to pull for foreign talent is absolutely critical. The other thing would be no budgets assigned to promotion. So I do want to tell you, there is only one basically branch of activity that will promote a startup ecosystem. Is the government. Only the government. There is no private investors that or private sector entities that should promote cities and countries. This is the job of the public sector. That's why we pay taxes to our public sector, to be in a situation that they leverage our city and country and make them known globally. And a lot of cities and countries are not even aware of this, that they have this role, that they should have this, those things. You would see this in successful cities and countries. You would always have some kind of a branch of invest in Paris, invest in London, and so on, because it's so critical. And what we always say is that the startup ecosystem is a product, a non-branded product with no marketing. Unrelated to how successful and good the product is, will underperform. Like, if you would build a startup, would you imagine doing zero marketing and just saying, no, people will derive themselves? No. So why do cities and ecosystems do that? That's absolutely something that I never understood. Governments are now waking up to that, and they're doing a lot of efforts on this level, which is very, very important. So I think those are the last slides. This one is talking about data flow challenges. So the idea here is that it connects a little bit to the question we had from Evelyn, I think from Belgium. To develop a startup ecosystem, you need effective strategy. And the thing is, how can you have effective strategy about which sector, which industry should you choose, what are the main points of problems and so on in your ecosystem, if you don't know enough about your ecosystem? We meet a lot of ecosystem developers that are not even aware of the situation of their ecosystem. So the idea is that for us to spend money on strategy and on steps to improve our ecosystem, we need to be aware of our ecosystem, and that's critical. You need to map your ecosystem. Who are the stakeholders? Who are the investors? More than anything, who are the startups? And I'll just tell you that the other stakeholders in your ecosystem would greatly benefit from an interactive resource that shows them who is there. In many places, you would have people that are unaware what their fellow entrepreneurs are working on. Imagine two people that are basically working on the same thing in the same city, and they don't even know about the existence of one another. They could have been partners, they could have done a lot of things together. So this lack of data flow is critical. By the way, in StartupBlink, we're dealing with it by building startup ecosystem portals, interactive portals for the ecosystems that we work with. And this is basically the last slide talking about the critical mass challenge. This is an important one. Achieving critical mass for your startup ecosystem will prevent the brain drain. It will build the investors ecosystem that you need, and it changes the psychology and narrative of your ecosystem, because that's what success does. It feeds into each other, into itself. So the idea over here is that remember that you want to achieve this critical mass. When I'm talking about this critical mass, I also want to let you know about the second tier cities. In many countries, we focus only on the capital city, on the top ecosystem. This is not good for equality. It's not good for economic development. You always have to think about the second tier cities that are not the center. Always nurture your center, your London, let's say. In Taiwan, it would be Taipei and so on. But always remember that it's very important for you to have the other cities in your country successful as well. Taiwan, for example, did something that I really like recently, that they're now developing their southern cities. I think it's absolutely great that they have their champion as Taipei, but at the same time, they're putting a lot of efforts on developing other second-tier ecosystem. We've seen a few countries, for example, Spain, that has two great ecosystems, Madrid and Barcelona, Germany, that has great amount of good cities. They have Berlin and they have Munich and they have Hamburg and Frankfurt. And then you see other ecosystems, for example, France, you would see Paris and almost no one else. Or in the Netherlands, you would see Amsterdam and almost no one else. And that's a mistake. We need to be in a situation that we develop our ecosystems across the country. I'll just tell you a little bit about the snowball theory. The snowball theory, once again, important for our government listeners. In the beginning stage of an ecosystem, there is no reason for the private sectors to be involved. They will not invest, they will not build co-working spaces, they will not build accelerators, and they're right. There is zero return on investment. So the idea is that the public sector has to pick up the gloves, do a lot of the work in the beginning as we're pushing the ecosystem forward, and then when the snowball becomes a massive avalanche, important to stay out of the way, disappear, let the private sector take over. But we need to be the ones from the public sector that are rolling the snowball. In the beginning, some advice to entrepreneurs, this is always our advice. If your ecosystem underperforms, don't be too sentimental about it, especially if you see that your government doesn't care about your ecosystem. By the way, this is why I'm really happy to see the ecosystem developers here pitching, because by pitching, you show that you care about your ecosystem, and that's absolutely great. Most governments are not there yet. So that's for that. So the idea for the entrepreneurs, if your ecosystem underperforms, either leave it or lead it. By leading it, I mean, do events, care about the growth of your fellow entrepreneurs. It's really important. And basically, this is my email. If anyone has any questions, of course, our site, startupblink.com. And we're very excited to have 1 hour of ecosystem pitches. And then after that, the panel. So I'll pass it to Catherine to take over. Thank you, everyone.